Music Not Diving with Scuba.
We Not Diving is brought to you by Acid. Head over to ac55id.com to check out the fastest growing new electronic music marketplace. You can buy music there, you can sell music, you can listen to podcasts, including this one. We've got all our releases on Hot Flush Recordings up there. It's just an awesome platform that I would highly recommend. They've also got a pressing plant. That's pretty amazing. And they're able to fulfill orders to press vinyl on demand. The other great thing about them is they're supporting this show. So head over to ac55id.com to check them out.
Brought to you by AC55ID.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba, and this is Music Not Diving, episode 2. Yeah, thank you so much to everyone who fed back on last week's episode 1 with Tom Middleton. That was just an amazing way to start off the channel, to start off a new version of the podcast. Of course, we were previously called the Not a Diving podcast, but this is the new flex, as it were. This is how we're going on. And yeah, just an amazing way to start. Okay, so on the show this week, we have an absolute legend of techno, UK techno, but just techno generally speaking. He's the man behind the Blueprint label, which is just an amazing piece of ongoing A&Ring, actually. I think that's the way I'd put it. His own productions are incredible too. He's released music with Tresor and many other labels. And he's a legendary DJ. It is, of course, none other than James Ruskin. Amazing to have him on. So we talk about all kinds of stuff relating to techno. Techno's been a kind of recurring theme on the old version of the podcast, the previous version. So it's nice to be continuing it now on Music Not Diving. Like I said, we get into the state of the scene today, what's been going on in the last few years with the hard techno stuff and all that kind of stuff. The history of UK techno and the history of techno generally speaking, and we get a little bit esoteric too with the meaning of the word techno and all, that kind of stuff, basically. So yeah, before we get into it, a reminder that you can support the show on patreon.com/scubaofficial. You can chuck us a one-off donation if you like at scubaofficial.io/support. We have a Discord server. There's a link in the show notes to the Discord server. And also we're on Reddit. We've got a brand new subreddit. So if you're that way inclined, well then you can go over and talk about the show on there too. So I think that's it. Have I forgotten anything? I've done this in one take, which is a pretty amazing achievement for me, actually. I think that's it, right? Yeah, so without further delay, here is James Ruskin. James Ruskin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Am I going to mention the why you might not be okay at the front? Well, I already have done, sorry.
You can, yes. You can. I had a bit of a car accident yesterday.
Right.
And so I'm hobbling around on crutches today.
Okay.
For the foreseeable.
Okay. Do you want to talk about what kind of a car accident it was?
I was getting ready to race this season in an old 1970s Formula 2 car.
Right. Okay.
And we went testing at Brands Hatch and it didn't go very well.
Okay.
I hit a wall. So, yes. Yeah.
I mean, you've done very well to get here. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I couldn't miss it.
Absolutely. Okay. So I've got a whole bunch of questions related to techno written down. Do you have a definition of what techno is, James Ruskin?
A definition.
What is the James Ruskin
We're going in hard. A definition. I mean, by its nature, I think it's hard to define. I suppose the basis for me is the idea of using technology to create something that we haven't necessarily heard before.
Okay.
I would say that's the bedrock of techno for me, from when it began, really. When the genre began and how it moved forward, it was the idea that you kept hearing something new.
Right. Sure.
There was no constraints on sound, instrumentation. That all went out the window, and it was just hearing something else.
Right.
And that's what I found exciting about it.
The sound of the future, basically.
Yeah, the sound of the future, yeah. Which I suppose as the years have marched on, becomes more difficult than it was back then.
Yeah, by definition, right?
By definition. But I think that the core idea of techno for me is when you hear something that you literally haven't heard before. I don't think it's rhythmically based that defines it. You know,
I mean, it's funny you say that, because I mean, I've heard it posited that, for example, if there is a kick, if there is a snare or a clap on the 2 and the 4, then it can't be it can't be techno. I mean, that's obviously a slightly extreme example of constraints, but I mean, but from what you're saying though, nothing like that really should be important in it, right? It's more of a kind of mentality. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Mentality. Quite possibly. I think it's what the listener wants to take from something as well. I mean, there's a lot of elements and a lot of genres that have come and gone that I would still consider to be techno.
Yeah.
You know, but things become fragmented. People need something new to label and to get hold of as something fresh and something else. But a lot of these things are still techno to me. Right,
yeah. Because I mean, it's become of identity as much as anything else, hasn't it, today? And there are kind of, you know, fashion notes associated with it. And people kind of use it as a bit sort of building block as part of their, I suppose, social identity, right? Which is obviously something that goes beyond music. I mean, can it go beyond music, do you think? I mean, is it something, you know, that can be that sort of wide, you know?
Undoubtedly. I think it certainly was, as a movement when it began, it certainly was. It was a subculture, I guess. I think that's harder to pinpoint these days, right. For many, many different reasons. I think techno, electronic music in general, was seeped into everybody's lives. You know, it's everywhere, whereas that wasn't the case when it began. You know, it's literally everywhere. It's on the TV.
It was recently, I think last week, the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, and I was reading a write-up of that, and the memories of the kids of that era, the way they talk about it now, is that this was the only place where we could get that form of humour, like that kind of what was seen as being a sort of cutting-edge form of humour. And I suppose in the early years of house and techno and dance music, generally speaking, it was that kind of thing, wasn't it? It was like, this is happening, it's only happening here. And I suppose what you're describing is it is everywhere now, and it isn't something which is sort of special, or I mean, maybe special is a different way of putting it, but like, it is just this diffuse thing now, right? It's not something which can only be experienced in a narrow
absolutely area. There was a very small core of people that were involved and that were digesting this new music, and it's a very different outlook now.
Okay, can you be specific?
Well, I suppose to start with, it was a subculture, wasn't it? Right. It was something very, very different to what was around us, and the clubs were different. The people that went to the clubs were different, and I suppose it was almost like you were at the beginning of something so new. Right. You know, the mainstream didn't know about this, but that's so far gone now. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And the people are surrounded by, I think people have very different definitions of techno now.
Absolutely.
But essentially everybody is surrounded by it, whether it's techno, electronic music, house music. I mean, it's just literally everywhere, isn't it?
Sure. Okay, so what is taking your current kind of version of James Ruskin, right? What are the good aspects of the techno scene today? Like, what are the things that you can put a finger on and say, yeah, this is still here. This is still, you know, this is still kind of like fulfilling the criteria of the definition of techno you just gave.
Well, the fact that it is still here is I mean, what other genres could last
right
this length of time and constantly remain relevant?
Right.
It's an interesting thing, really, when you think, I mean, you know, when did Warren Atkins come up with Techno City? When was that released? Early, probably 83, something like that. And we're sat here talking about it now.
Sure.
I mean, it's incredible, the longevity, the fact that it constantly gets reinvented through sonics, through people experimenting. through people getting machines to do things that they weren't possibly designed for.
Yeah.
This is what keeps it exciting. So I think regardless of whether it's become, to all intents and purposes, a lot more mainstream, if you peel back the layers, the core is still there.
Right.
The interest is still there. The dynamicism of it is still there.
Yeah. Specifically talking about clubs, one of the things we talked about quite a bit on the show recently has been the pressures that particularly small clubs have come under in the last few years. Running costs, difference in audience expectations. The festival circuit becoming much more important. In terms of your, the shows that you've been playing the last couple of years and your kind of just general experiences as a DJ, what are your kind of general observations on that side of it, and with regards specifically with techno and how the music has developed? Like, has the relative decline of small venues affected your experience of it and also the music?
That's a tricky one, isn't it?
Do you agree with the premise? Is that something you've noticed? The small venues coming under pressure.
Undoubtedly,
Yeah.
And I think a vast majority of the people that are struggling is down to costs.
Right.
And as you've just pointed out, it's people's expectations of what they want from their Saturday night out. What is it they're after? There's a picture painted via festivals, etc., of what a show should be.
Yeah, it's unrealistic, right?
Absolutely unrealistic. and for me, it's not what I want. I want a dark box where you probably can't even see the DJ. That suits me a lot better, because it's about music. It's about the immersive experience of music. If I wanted to see a show, I'd go to the theatre or
Right.
whatever the case may be.
Go watch a film at IMAX, right? That's the experience which is being offered, isn't it? These fucking screens, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go off one about screens, but honestly, why is there an enormous flat screen in a club or that kind of environment at all?
But it's interesting. Is this what the new generation of clubbers want? Have they ever been asked if they want this, or is it just because this is just the way it is now?
Right,
This is the norm. Huge productions, but it does all stem from festivals.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Well, that's where it originated. That's where it came from, right? It was the big EDM festival. It was EDM, wasn't it? It was that. It was the big EDM festival. It was in the kind of late 2000s, early 2010s. Certainly exacerbated by the smartphones being a thing. The desire people have to document what they're doing at all times. Right.
I often wonder. I often wonder, what do all these people do with these little films that they? I know that a lot of it gets posted on Instagram and what have you, I'd imagine, but they must have literally thousands of clips of essentially the same thing. What do you think anyone sits at home, reliving the moment through these films? I'm curious.
I'm sceptical that they do. Seriously though, so. Do you think that, or to what extent has this trend affected the music per se? Because we talked a fair bit on the show about how, the hard techno thing and whether or not it's over and all that, and maybe we'll get onto that. But do you think that changing environment and the expected environment affected the music explicitly?
I think there's a lot of factors why we've ended up where we are. I think that lockdown has got a lot to answer for with where we are musically. Yeah. Also, and this is an expectations thing again. You got to think that the teenagers that came of age during that period absorbed everything via their laptops. So this created this environment of the show, or however you want to put it, and this became the expectation. You've also got teenagers that were essentially locked up for years that want to go mad, and what does that breed? You can understand why the music became faster, more. Sure. I don't know that aggressive is the right word, because
right. Because it was more. It's sort of like it was bubblegum, wasn't it? More than aggressive. It wasn't that kind of. Yeah, it wasn't like kind of like metal mentality like that. It was very much kind of like Well, I call it sped up tech house before, but I mean, do you know what I mean? It's
and
like-
you would be right.
yeah, right.
But what happens is that as it becomes faster and faster and harder, the music suffocates itself, because you get to the point where where do you go? What do? You go to a club and listen to 8 hours of literally a kick drum, because there's no space in the music for anything else to happen, and then everyone gets bored.
Right.
And then we've just got to pray that we don't end up with minimal again.
Well, that's a question which I have asked before on the show. I mean, I've had Ben Sims on recently as probably the most direct comparison here, and I was asking him about, you know, because you're right, this has happened before, right, and that's what essentially minimal was a reaction to. So, in your experience, like looking back on that era, past just the kind of BPMs getting faster and things getting harder, what are the similarities in maybe the broad scene between, because we obviously mentioned COVID and that's kind of a special case, but like what were the things, what were the sort of similar issues that you could pinpoint in that kind of weird late 90s, you know, hard techno thing and now? I mean, are there similarities? To what extent is it comparable?
I suppose just in the pathway of where the music has ended up, I can see similarities, and I can see that that it will drop off you know, the edge of the cliff at some point.
It's always a cycle, right?
Look, music, fashion, everything's cyclical, isn't it? Isn't there a theory that it's a 30-year cycle with these type of
I've
things?
been reading The Fourth Turning actually recently, so yeah, it's like 20-year cycles, full 20 years. Anyway, that's like let's not get bogged down in that. But yeah, it's cyclical, absolutely, and it's observably cyclical. Right?
Yes. So from that perspective, there's huge similarities, and I do understand it. But it's for me, it's when you get to that point that you can no longer hear any music, or it's become so ridiculous, people need something else.
Do you remember that at the time? Because I sort of remember this. I was very much just in the crowd. I mean, you were, you know, very much participating in a way that, you know, well, I mean, there's a few years between us, but like, was it? Because obviously you guys must have thought, well, this is not great, right? Because obviously it wasn't. Like, could you remember whether you could pinpoint at the time the causes? Because of these things seem to acquire momentum of their own, don't they? But was there a sort of sense about why it was happening? Do you remember?
I can remember discussions like we're having now about where we were, very much so, and you could see that this couldn't continue forever, because, as I say, it became this wall of sound, and you were walking into a club, and the warm-up DJ would be absolutely leathering it, and there was nowhere to go for the whole night.
That sounds familiar, right?
Yeah, it's very familiar, and that will become boring to everybody eventually. And there has to be change, but we're on that ramp again at the moment. Personally, that's the way I see it. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't have a major amount of contact with it. I don't tend to play now so many of those clubs that are pushing this.
That was a question I asked Ben. Like when it was becoming popular, was it? I mean, you must have had situations where you were playing, and someone asked you this on before you was just playing this horrendous nosebleed stuff.
Yes. I had one particular occasion where the person that was playing before me was
150
and in the last 15 minutes decided to go up.
Okay.
And then just turn the deck off as well, without, you know, not even I'm done now, not a nudge, this is the last one. It was just stop. I'm like, wow, right. That's an interesting transition. But yeah, I forgot what the question was.
Yeah, I mean, how many of those experiences did you have? I mean, was like, you know, this when it was becoming prominent?
There was a lot. Yeah. I think I'm lucky where a lot of the places I play are a lot more mindful of these sorts of situations. I don't think if promoters are programming nights in that way, then they really need to think long and hard about why and what why because it doesn't help anybody, because if you've got a drop of 20 BPM 30 BPM even in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone's playing at 150, 160, I can't, because I can't get there.
Yeah.
Even, not that I want to, but
5 minutes of ambient before you can reset it, right?
look, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a time and a place for everything, and having your head smashed in at that speed sometimes is great, but I just don't want it for the whole night.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about minimal. This is not up your strata by the sound of things, no?
Oh, look, there was some good music in there. There always is. With any genre, you can always find something. But let's be honest, it was so fucking boring.
Tell me about it emerging, though, because as you're saying, you guys were having conversations at the time. Why is it getting so fast? What is this terrible stuff that's happening to the music? At what point did it become clear that minimal was going to take over to the extent that it did, and have the influence to the extent that it did?
I mean, it was a long time ago, but I remember it being in the blink of an eye. One minute we were over
Within a
here,
few
the next
months,
minute we were there, and it's like, hang on a minute, what's happened? And then I took offence is a bit strong, but using the term of minimal. I mean, minimal for me was Minimal Nation. Robert Hood. That was highly intricate, interesting music, and then all of a sudden, this highly uninteresting music was being labelled as the same thing, and I couldn't really understand it. Look, I'm generalising a lot here, and
Sure.
There was some great music made during this period as well, but there was also just some. I couldn't understand what it was for.
Right.
I think that's the best way of putting it. I didn't understand what it was for.
Yeah. Okay.
Other than maybe getting 10 of them and layering them together and trying to piece some kind of sounds in
you
there.
talk about individual tracks, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know, but just the kick drum with a ping every minute and a half didn't really work for me.
Yeah, and there's like 12-minute tunes where literally nothing happens, and that's sort of the point of the track, was like that nothing is happening.
But the protagonist of that sound before it happened was did and do make really interesting music. It was just the this. I'm going to use the term bandwagon jumping. I'm being a bit harsh, but you know what I'm saying. People kind of jumped on this idea because it became highly fashionable. It was where you were told you were supposed to be listening to and where you should be.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, as you're saying that, as you're talking about this, this big immediate jump. One of the things about the scene today and culture today is that it's pretty fragmented, right? It seems like you can identify sort of things that happen, but it's very rare to have something which is really kind of ubiquitous, right? Which something really makes a big kind of splash. And I wonder, is it possible to have that same feeling, that everything has just changed, right? And this previous stuff doesn't exist anymore. Do you think that could happen now? It would be different, wouldn't it?
It would be very different because of the level of subgenres we have
Yeah,
already.
that's what.
Is that what you're?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I mean, trying to fit in between those gaps now is a pretty difficult job, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And will become more so with the technology that's arriving. I mean, you've got AI filling in the gaps for you now, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got some questions about AI. We'll get onto that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, do you think that that sense that you just described, right? Suddenly you kind of look around and what everyone is playing is different. Because I mean, I suppose the way the dance scene, quote unquote. I mean, there is a techno scene, but it seems like there's more sort of parts to it. I mean, I don't know. Do you recognise what I'm trying to put my finger on?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I try not to get drawn into these because for me, I just do what I do. Mm-hmm. I don't tend to. Sometimes it's popular, sometimes it isn't. I've been fortunate enough to for this to be my life and my living for 30 years. So I don't. What's the best way of putting it? I don't tend to look at what the next thing's going to be. I just it's what is right for me as a DJ and as a producer. Sure. I stick to my path, and sometimes it's better than others, and you can make mistakes on your path, but trends the next big thing doesn't draw me in.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Let's talk about the label, because that sort of ties into this. The Blueprint, as we were mentioning off camera, 30 years next year,
30
right?
years, yes.
That is an uncomfortable number to say, isn't it?
It makes me feel old, I will admit. Yeah, I mean, it was conceived around this time 30 years ago with the catalyst for it. So, I mean, I hadn't actually thought about it until recently. Someone else mentioned it to me, actually, that it was coming up to the 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, wow, that's quite a journey.
Because 20 years is like something, but then 30 is like, oh God, that's like.
You know, still lucky enough to be releasing music.
It's
Still lucky enough
amazing-
to be pressing records.
It's an
you know?
amazing achievement. It genuinely is. Yeah. And
Thank you.
to be, I think what's really great about it as a catalogue, because I mean, I look at our label and I listen to the thing. It's like, I mean, it's a real kind of like, you know, kind of journey through eras, and you kind of remember your mindset when you sign certain things. What's amazing about the Blueprint catalogue is that how it's got a real kind of arc to it, you know, and it's like the quality is just so high, like for the whole time, you know. It's like, but it's got definable eras, you know, and like, you know, there are, you can just see how it's a kind of like, you know, story of how the music has changed to some extent, but it's also a story of you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I picture it through production techniques,
Right.
almost, you know,
Yeah.
how things have moved along with, it's back to the technology thing again, how people make music these days, and how we made it when we made the first record. I mean, the studio then was...
Yeah, go on. What was the studio?
The studio was a cracked copy of Cubase on an Atari.
Nice.
Of course.
Always a good start.
It was Akai S950 with a few seconds of sampling time.
Right.
Mono.
Yep. Yeah, it had to be mono so you get more sampling time, right?
Well, funnily enough, when the first release was actually recorded with only one speaker,
Okay.
only one monitor. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think we had a very cheap art effects unit, a Roland R8, as I remember.
Right.
I think the 909 come later, but that was really the core of it. In a very battered 16-channel desk that was just made so much noise, it was unbelievable. But then that
So was the sampler
part of
doing most of the work, basically?
it was doing a lot of the work at the beginning, yes. Yeah. So you'd be truncating samples, trying to eke that last bit out.
Yeah, right.
But it's necessity, isn't it? Mother of all
Absolutely.
invention. You know, you can you can draw something out of anything, and this idea of getting equipment to do that little bit extra is kind of exciting for me.
Totally. I mean, we've talked many times on the show about how having quite tight technological constraints can be really, really creatively stimulating, actually. Just being forced to, you know, do workarounds to achieve almost anything. It can be really amazing, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it is one of I'm a little bit of a studio hoarder. So I've got...
And you still got the 950.
When myself and Richard started recording separately, Richard Polson, who I set up Blueprint with, he ended up with the 950. But I made some inquiries with Nick Dunton, 65D, Nick Dunton, and he thinks he might know where it is. So
really? Okay.
I'm hoping one day I will get my 950 back, because it's probably the only thing that I really regret not having still in my arsenal. Whether I would use it or not, I don't know. But just the fact that the history that's attached to that.
Totally.
That bit of equipment.
So yeah. So what are the other notable bits that you've got hoarded away?
Oh, there's all sorts. I mean, there's my Pro One is the sequential Pro One is one of my favourite boards, which actually Carl Regis gave me many years ago. There's all sorts. I mean, the 909. You've got to love the 909, haven't you? That's seen some action over the years, but. Everything's got a story. Every bit of equipment's got a story. And what I tend to do is use something in various settings, and then it might get put away for years, and then you drag that back out again to see what else you can get it to do.
Absolutely. So keeping on the label, what are the we've talked about the original studio. What was releasing the first record like? So did you have distribution, for example? Presumably it was vinyl only released. Obviously it must have been.
So myself and Richard done a record for a label called Guilty, which was based on the Isle of Wight, and Josh Brent, who does Shat Tracks, it was his label. Richard at the time they had a record shop as well, and Richard was buying records from them. So we made these tracks and sent it to him, and he released them. They then set up a distribution company, and they offered us a P&D. So we recorded some tracks, and next thing
P&D, it's easy.
next thing we know, we were
That's doing it on
the first record came out. So
so you never had to do the whole going around shops with a bag of white labels in the back of the car.
Oh no, we did that prior to this 12-inch. We pressed one up ourselves.
Okay.
You know, going round to.
So you did bear those scars anyway, right?
Yeah, going round and having to stand there whilst they listen to it, and then, we'll take 5 copies.
That is one of the most. You learn so much about yourself and your music when
you learn so much about the people that are running the shops as well.
Exactly.
That's an interesting experiment, taking your own music round to record shops and seeing whether they will take a few copies.
Yeah, I remember doing that, going to Bar Vinyl in Camden, and the guy listening to it and just looking at me and saying, "You need to get better at production."
Right.
He literally said that, and it wasn't even my tune.
Right.
It was someone else. I was like, actually, no, I just signed it. I need to get better at A&R, is what you mean. I mean, but yeah, just that watching their face, you're like, please like it. No, don't like it.
But it's completely different times, weren't they? I mean, that's when you used to press like 100 white labels. Now people are all about selling 100 records.
Oh, man. Tell me about it. Let's contrast that to, so you had P&D deal.
Yeah.
Did they handle promo stuff for you then, the distributor?
No, we used to order 100 white labels and we'd sit mailing them out.
Right.
Which was fantastic, actually, because what that done, it gave you a direct point of contact with the people that you were getting the music to.
Yeah.
So
you mail them out with reaction sheets?
No,
just so you phone them up and then call them up and say...
Or no, just send the record.
Right.
Yeah, they either liked it or they didn't.
Really? Wow, okay.
But the people that were... you soon found out if people were into it, because if they jumped on the phone, there was a telephone number on the record. Yeah. I mean, that's how I first hooked up with Surgeon Tony.
Really? Okay.
Was through sending the first record. He was straight on the phone. Next thing, he's down in London, coming to stay for the weekend, and the rest is kind of history. But it was a great way of creating contact. But we never put reaction sheets in, no.
Yeah, right, okay. Because that was the classic one, obviously, but I suppose that's more of a kind of promo company thing. So did you mentioned that's a great way of making contact. So did you feel like a big part of the scene before that? Was that a kind of way into the kind of wider scene for you?
I think with the UK, there wasn't actually that many labels at that time. In the mid 90s, I mean, there was Downwards was already going, Spira, Peace Frog, which was obviously a bigger operation.
Spira, yeah, okay.
Yeah, there was a big.
Do you know Mick Herschel?
No,
he was part of Spira.
Okay.
Yeah, he manages. He used to be my manager actually, but manages Eric Prydz most famously.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mick's big in the game, man. But yeah, part of Spira. And I own those records. And when I started working with him, I never told this story before. When I started working with Mick, he was like, "What kind of music do you like? What kind of techno do you like?" I was like, "Yeah, I'd love these Spira records from the 90s." He was like, "Well, I made those tunes." I was like, "Okay."
They were great records.
Yeah, mad records, right?
Mad records, yeah. But there wasn't a huge amount of labels back then. So I guess we did feel very much part of that scene. And then I think everyone started travelling, so you could see that it was impacting in the rest of Europe as well.
Right. So, okay, let's just go down this we'll come back to more of the label stuff. So, So you mentioned Downwards and Tony, and there's photos. There's some great photos of you guys from that era. They were obviously in the Midlands. So did UK techno then feel very small? It must have done, but from what you're saying, what you're saying,
relatively so, yes.
And were you primarily looking at Europe in that point, or America?
I think you were just looking everywhere. It was always has been very global, hasn't it? I think the communication has always been there, regardless of geography.
Right.
Okay. So, but we were very. I always felt that we were very supportive of one another with the UK scene.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where Surgeon, for example, when we first started, our mixing desk blew up, and he, he lent us some money to go and get another one to keep keep everything going, and that's the way it was. We there was no kind of. We wanted people to make music. We wanted new records to come out. We wanted people recording, and everyone was very supportive. Yeah. We wanted it to go and play, so we had music that we could DJ at the weekends, and you wanted people to succeed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, back to the label. I mean, the question I was trying to get around to asking was, can you compare? And this is probably quite an easy question to answer in some respects. Can you compare what it's like running a label now with those early years of the label? No, not completely different. Right?
No, it's a very different animal now.
Yeah.
Things have just moved on. It was much more analog back then. It was fax machines. I mean, that's funnily enough. That's when we thought we'd made it as a label, when we went and bought a fax machine. Okay. We're there. We've got a fax machine, and that's how you communicated. And anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, but no, there's similarities. You go and get the record mastered, cut.
Yep.
The process is still the same. Do
you still do vinyl for everything? Most things.
Yes, I've tried a couple of experiments with digital, and the strange thing is, if there isn't a vinyl, the digital will just. It won't sell, and
really. So
that's what I've found. But I've not done that many. I've done it as experiments just to see, and they will fall through the cracks if there's no vinyl, which to me,
counterintuitive.
Absolutely, it seems bizarre to me, but that's where we are.
Okay.
I mean, the correlation I can't quite work it out.
It's funny, but actually, I think people are looking for. Tangibility, right? Because there's so much music now.
Yes.
And it seems, and because obviously the vast majority of it is digital only, and that I think makes it seem a little bit throwaway. And once you show people, I suppose it's an indication that you're taking it seriously as much as anything else. It's like this is something that we've bothered to do this. I mean, we still, we had quite a few years on Hot Flush where we hardly did vinyl for anything. And it seemed to work. And then we were talking off mic about how quickly the whole thing changes now. And I think it does change really quickly. But I think that has become people looking to the sort of real world manifestation of something now seems to have really become sort of back into people's minds as something that's important. And so, what you're saying, it's counterintuitive. It actually kind of makes some sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. But I do wonder, the person that has based their decision to buy a download on whether or not there's a physical copy. That's the bit I can't quite work out. Or because
maybe it's just a kind of like a general kind of feeling about whether something's, or whether it's getting something into their mind. I don't know. It's a
strange one. How did it work for you then digitally when you?
So for a while it was really good. We had a period of label where Beatport in particular was really strong for us, and was the kind of basically the period in which streaming was coming to prominence. So maybe sort of 2014, 15, 16, sort of the mid to 2010s basically. And over those years, Spotify gradually became more, gradually just took over, took over in terms of like what our kind of revenue share was. And that was so weird to me at the time watching that happen. And then gradually Beatport has kind of become less important. And actually the single most, probably, streaming is still important, but probably the most important platform for us now is Bandcamp.
Absolutely.
And that's, we had actually a couple of weeks ago on the show, we had Ali, who was one of the main label reps there, and we were talking about that. And I just think it's an amazing platform in so many ways.
I agree.
But it's really, it's just become that much more important for us, basically. So it's come, it's been changed over time, but but so for you too,
Absolutely. Bandcamp. With Bandcamp can keep the boat afloat. Really, it's for us, it's a highly important platform, and as I said, it can prop a release up really, and make it viable physically from a vinyl standpoint as well.
Yeah, sure. And it's the ability to also talk to people, know who the people are. Like that's the kind of game changer. That's why I talk about it so much on the show, and talk about the importance of it. Like the big problem with digital music, generally speaking, is you haven't got a fucking clue who likes you, who's into your stuff. And the same is true. I mean, the same was true with record shops. So you never really knew who were buying the records. But I mean, that should be, if you're selling stuff digitally, there should always be that there, right? And it's such a failing of the streaming platforms and also of download stores. But Bandcamp is like,
But then the streaming platforms and digital music in general, the window is so small now that people haven't got time to find out from both sides of the fence who, why, what, because it's gone in 24 hours and they're on to the next thing. Okay. This disposable nature of music now. Yeah. Look, it's not just down to music. It's the way society is these days. I think it's
sure.
People's attention spans are tiny. But I suppose with music, it's almost like it has to be that way now because of the weight of product that is coming out on a daily basis. I mean, you must see this yourself. Your promo box now is just like, it would be a full-time job to go through every one of these.
It genuinely would, yeah.
And so much good music must fall through the cracks because of this idea of having to get to go through everything. It's impossible unless you do nothing else and you don't sleep.
Yeah, and who does that? I mean, I was going to ask about promo. I mean, this is a bit of a sort of granular discussion, but I know lots of people who are going to be listening to this, going to be watching it, are people who run labels and people are releasing music. What promo do you guys do for Blueprint releases now? I mean, do you use one of the promo services? Do you
we use EPM.
Yeah.
It's a fairly minimal promo campaign. I think things tend to promote themselves generally. So we just don't go mad. When we have done bigger campaigns, I don't see that it makes a great deal of difference. So EPM deal with it because they deal with our digital side of things anyway.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes hand in hand.
And having vinyl is promo in itself, by the sound of things. I think it is.
Yes.
I think it is. I think that it actually fulfills sort of that purpose, right? Like it just, like I said, it's kind of a signal on you.
No, I agree, and I've always said if it was ever a point where we had to be a purely digital label, I'm not sure that I could continue under that remit. Yeah. For me, there has to be a physicality. I mean, buying files, it's like buying thin air, isn't it? Where's your record collection? Oh, it's that box in the corner. It just doesn't work for me, and it's not why we started, and it's not why we've continued to do this. So if we reached a point, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, there's releases that don't cover themselves now.
Sure. And that's always going to be
that's always going to be the way. But generally, I think they cover themselves. So if that had to stop, it's almost saying a record label to me, there has to be a record.
Yeah, right.
As antiquated as a format as that might be, I love the physicality of it. I love the look. I love the whole process of putting a record on. It's a process, you know, the lifting of the needle, it's something else, and it's probably an age thing as well. You know,
I think people, young people, like it too. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's a reason for. I mean, it has come back to some extent, right? I mean, you see these kind of stories in the press, which are, you know, mostly about, you know, Taylor Swift albums selling on vinyl. But like, you know, there is something about it which doesn't seem to be true for the CD, for example, or for tapes. I mean, obviously, when people sell cassette, we've sold the odd cassette on Bandcamp, but like,
yeah, we have.
You know, like, but that's like vinyl though seems to, especially a 12-inch vinyl, there is a sort of mystique around it, isn't there? There is something different, like the smell of it and like the.
It's the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure if you went through your record collection, there's a vast majority of it. You would know where you bought it, when. You know, there's a whole process to it, and it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, and.
That's a question I've got for you. Yeah. So are you a digger? Would you classify yourself as that? Because in my conversation with Ben, and also we had Mr. G on the show fairly recently. I mean, he's a extremely committed record collector. Would you count yourself in that sort of?
I would not put myself in the same vein as those two guys. I mean, Ben. Yeah, he's prolific.
Yeah, right.
I still buy vinyl every week.
Well then, okay, at least that is in itself a commitment to the cause.
I'd say most days there's a delivery.
Okay. Okay. So is there a room in the house devoted?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I got rid of a lot years and years ago. Right. A lot of promos and stuff like that. Because obviously, we used to get sent a lot of records,
right?
And it gets to the point. It's just like, well, you know,
there's only so many white labels.
Yeah. So I did thin things out. But what I tend to do now is there's a lot of things that I buy that from when I was young, and you know, you just didn't have the money. You couldn't afford to buy everything that you wanted. So I'm an avid fill the gap purchaser, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I still love it. I still get excited about the mailer turning up with a new record. It's like my fix. But I went through a period of stopping for a while. But I've got pretty bad again now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've never been. I mean, I've got a lot of records, but I think probably it's been moving around. You know, when you move different countries, it becomes too much of a thing, too much of a, well, moving a record collection is one of the worst things you can possibly do, to be honest.
Yeah, I did it recently. And I mean, like mine, I've probably got about, I don't know, 10,000 maybe.
Okay.
So it's not, but
when you move. That's a lot of records to move.
When you move them, it's like, I'm never doing this again. This is it.
Yeah,
but
totally.
what I love about what I found that when you do move them around is you boxing them up or whatever, and you'll find that gem that you forgot that you had, and then it all makes it worthwhile.
Totally. Okay, let's go back to the start, shall we? I believe you were into the early hip hop scene. Is that correct? Yeah. So basically, this is a kind of there seems to be a common thread amongst people of your vintage. So Ben, similar, had Trevor Jackson on the show, who described a similar path. Mr. G was the same, guy called Gerald. The early hip hop scene, the kind of the UK version of the early hip hop scene sounds like it was pretty amazing.
Definitely. I mean, it was just the electronic music thing. I mean, hip hop and electro, they were kind of almost, well, they were massively intertwined. So you were just hearing this new, fresh music that nobody had heard before.
Yeah.
So
as a kid, it sounds like it must have just been.
It was amazing. That mid '80s period was incredible. And then we had you obviously didn't have the money to buy all of these 12 inches. So then obviously we had the electro series, which, I mean, changed everything. And it was just being involved with the whole.
So can you describe that for people with zero knowledge of this whole thing?
Describe
the Electro series and like what it was like, and
It was like you were involved with something that no one else knew about.
Right.
It was
back to that thing.
It's back to that thing again. You and we had so few reference points as to what was going on, particularly because obviously from the New York sort of thing with the breaking and all that. I mean, you just used to watch Beat Street over and over again, and literally over and over again. This was our reference, and I mean there was Wild Style. Another Beat Street was the one for me. Then Wild Style, and to some degree Breakdance, I suppose, even though that's pretty bad.
That's all right. As a young man,
it was seeing Ice-T doing Reckless on there. It's just like
Right.
There was moments, but
can you put your finger on a few tunes that stick out in your memory from that?
Man Parish, hip hop, bebop was always and Cybertron Clear. They're I mean, Cybertron didn't Missy Elliott even sample that
Possibly.
not so long back.
Yeah.
There was so many. Nucleus, I mean, Aline, Release Yourself, all these amazing records, and you felt like there was just you and a few people that knew about this,
Right.
and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. I loved every single part of it.
Yeah.
The breakdancing, the graffiti, the music, the DJ, everything. It had every element you could possibly want as a movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Had you learned any instruments or anything? Did you have any musical background at that point as a kid?
No. I had a bash at the violin, I think, at junior school, but that was
Okay.
about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things you're forced into, which, saying that now, I probably wish I'd have learned it properly. But anyway, no.
Mm-hmm.
No, always messing around with tape decks and things like that, but not anything.
Yeah. So describe to our younger viewers the process of making a mixtape with two tapes.
The pause button.
Yeah.
That was
Exactly.
before you had when you had two tapes. That was
Explain that in detail, please.
You'd stepped up in the world, but the pause button was the one, particularly with the radio.
So how did that actually work?
Well, you'd be as quick as you possibly could, so you didn't get the adverts or the talking to hit the track that you wanted, and you'd be praying that they didn't speak too much over it,
And then making mixtapes with those.
Yeah, when you got the
other tapes.
when you got the tape to tape
Layers of
but
tape.
even the stop start was fine to begin with. And again, this is going back to Beat Street when there's a particular scene in it where the guy's messing around with tape and some records and that in his bedroom, and I can remember messing around with my school friends, making an absolute racket, thinking you could put two things together. It was just all new. Every bit of it was new. Loved it.
When was the first time you got on a pair of turntables?
I mean, properly or?
Well, what you consider to be proper at the time?
Well, I mean, we were always messing around, but they weren't very speed or anything. Belt drives.
Yeah,
you were again just making a racket and not quite getting your head around the fact of why you can't get two things to fit together. It was all very rudimentary, and then obviously you realise that there's a reason behind this, as in direct drive and vary speed, and then you realise that it's the Technics 1200 that you could never afford in a million years, and when you eventually get a pair, it's just your world is.
Do you remember the first time you had a go on one? On a pair, the mixer.
The first time. Do you know what? It's so long ago. No, I can't think of the specific. I actually taught myself to mix in a club.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That sounds like a dangerous game.
It was. I was living in Northampton for a short period of time, and it was. I think it was a student night or something like along those lines. But that's where I taught myself to mix. It wasn't at home because I couldn't afford a pair of Technics.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get a pair until I went to. In fact, I went to uni and spent my first student loan on a pair of Technics. But a mate of mine.
Well spent.
Yeah. Exactly. I've still got them actually.
I've still got my first pair.
Yeah. Well, they don't break, do they?
They don't.
They're serious pieces of kit. But no, a mate of mine had a pair of Gemini direct drives,
Yes.
which they say they're direct drives, but they're pretty ropey. And I remember, and obviously everyone would just go to the record shop, go around his, have a mix.
Yeah, those Gemini decks.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember them being sort of somewhat wobbly as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were terrible, honestly. Terrible. I'm pretty expensive as well. Not that much cheaper than 1210s, but yeah. So when did you? Well, you've just mentioned teaching yourself to mix, but like, when did you consider yourself to be a DJ? Not a professional DJ, but when did you?
I suppose it would have been around the same time. So
So you going out and buying a lot of records then?
and hence me getting slots, and someone I knew at the time put nights on.
Yeah.
So I was getting warm-up slots basically because I bought records. I was always hanging out in record shops.
And what kind of stuff were you buying?
Well, my record collection was sort of across the board. But you got to remember, so back then there wasn't the glut of records that we've got nowadays.
Course.
House, techno, it was all there or thereabouts, really. So it wasn't anywhere near as segregated as it is now.
Yeah.
So it was through buying records and then a chance meeting with someone who I ended up sharing a flat with that I started getting slots, and then he was going into the studio to make records. So I had a car, so I used to take him.
What year are we in, roughly?
I would say we're in 91.
Okay. So had you been going out raving?
Yes.
In the preceding years?
Yes.
So what was the first rave you went to? Do you remember? Or what's the first raving memory that you have?
Well, I left school in 88.
Okay. That's a good year to leave school.
It was a good year to leave school. So that summer was pretty crazy, but that was more clubs, and then the illegal parties, I don't even know if they had names then, cropped up, and I mean that ballooned fairly quickly into the your perceptions and your rain dances and such like, which were great fun, but the kind of funfair aspect, and I think the last one I went to was probably Perception, and there was all the fairground rides, and and it became this kind of massive circus, which was brilliant. But I always preferred a dark, sweaty club. It made a lot more sense to me. So that was great, the rave thing, but they got shut down all the time.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to Ben about this. I mean, indulge me because I was too young to experience this firsthand. Obviously, so many stories. So, can you describe a good example of a illegal big outdoor rave? Can you talk us through one of those in particular?
I mean, it just used to be a tent or even an outdoor event with a stack of speakers, a DJ that you couldn't see, that you didn't really, that were playing 45-minute sets or whatever, that you weren't overly concerned with the lineup. What you were concerned with was jumping around in a field with like-minded people listening to music that you hadn't heard before. It was just this, it seemed like you were part of this new wave, this new thing that was happening. So they were great fun for a short period of time. It became a bit over the top, I think, towards the end as they became illegal. The things changed.
Because it's really only it's basically 2 years, isn't it? Pretty much this was going on. Maybe
I suppose it was.
It's really not long at all. And when you think about what's happened in the last 2 years, it's a blink of an eye, really.
I think, which was probably a good thing because as money got involved, and I think things took a different turn, really. But from a legal standpoint, and obviously what people were selling in these places, and the element that brought to it. So I think it almost like it ran its course a little bit. That side of things, but But then again, I mean, how different is it to some of the festivals these days? I mean, that's another story. But I was more than happy to
see the back of them.
Not to see the back of them, but get back in the club.
Right.
Get back into a box with the like-minded people.
So it's been suggested on the show before that the Criminal Justice Bill and the Criminal Justice Act, which was 94. Which basically had the effect of shutting down the outdoor, which obviously is a couple of years later, but they were still going on. Basically, that actually had a positive effect. This has been posited previously on the show because it basically got people into clubs, and actually clubs did quite well out of that. Is that your memory of the whole thing, generally speaking? Because that kind of must have coincided with you being able to play out a bit more and like.
I'll be honest with you, it's not something that I was overly conscious of about whether it made a positive effect.
Because at the time, people were freaking out about it, weren't they? I mean,
that they were, but I mean, it was kind of farcical in itself, wasn't it? As a bill and as what they were trying or attempting to police. I mean,
it was the term repetitive beats was written into it, wasn't it?
I mean, what is that? It's a nonsense, isn't it? And I don't think that it held any kind of weight to anything really. But so. I hadn't thought about it, but I'm sure it did have a positive effect on clubs. But I think because that's where I was anyway, they were always there.
Sure. So what were, in your experience, the key techno clubs in the UK, which kind of grew the whole thing? I mean,
Lost.
I knew you were going to say Lost, yeah. So I'm hopefully going to get Bicknell on the show, Steve Bicknell on the show, to talk about this. But so tell me about Lost.
Lost was our place. Lost was it. Lost was a techno club but had its own thing going on within the techno sphere. I mean, when you walk in and Steve would be playing and he was playing what other people weren't playing, it was different, and we got to see everybody that we wanted to see there. We went there religiously. Well, I mean, Jeff first coming over, Jeff Mills. That was the first time that I saw him DJ. I think it was on a New Year's Eve. It might have been 92 or something like that anyway. I'm not great with dates, but I just remember walking in there going, oh my God, everything just suddenly made sense to me.
Right.
Because he was the path that, and with you are, that they were taking musically, this kind of very harsh, but I can't really describe it.
Harsh, but still grooving.
Yeah,
right?
but still
had that
but and then to see this weaved together the way that he did, I'm like, this is it. This is what it's about. But the club was it was basic. You had a couple of lights and loads of people in a warehouse going mad. It was brilliant. Never went to a bad one. Everybody went there. Everybody knew each other. It was fantastic. So that was our home. That was our home.
Yeah. And that's London.
Yes.
Right. Was there anything comparable at the time?
There was a lot of other things going on. I mean, obviously you had House of God in Birmingham, which, but that was different again. But
tell me about that. I mean, Tony has been on the show and he describes House of God as being a big, stupid rave, I think is how he put it. But is that your memory of it?
Yeah,
and it's still going now, of course. But
I would go with that.
Yeah, okay.
I would go with that. And I used to love playing there, and it was just it was a different take on it.
Yeah.
Atomic Jam again, another take on it. Slightly more relaxed, I'd say, than House of God. House of God is definitely its own beast.
Okay.
There was a lot going on. The Orbit in Leeds, that was another great venue. It was a good time for clubs.
And what's your sort of trajectory within this? Because you said, you mentioned playing at House of God, and I started Blueprint in '96, obviously. So, talk to me a little bit about how your journey developed over those few years
with DJing.
Yeah, and like the whole thing, just getting involved in the whole thing, I suppose, becoming part of it.
It happened overnight, really, with the first record coming out. So I was playing before, but not I was doing a sound engineering course at City of Westminster as well at the same time whilst we were setting the label up. So that was my kind of focus then. And then the record came out, and the first record came out, and then started playing House of God,
basically,
etc.
I mean, when you say the record came out, and what was everyone just playing it? Everyone just jumped on it. Was that essentially what happened?
I can't say that everyone was. I remember shortly after it came
had
out,
an impact, right?
we heard it at Lost, and we were like,
Okay.
okay, so we're clearly onto something here.
That's a great feeling, isn't it?
It was. There's nothing better than hearing your first record the first time at the club.
100%.
So it changed overnight, really.
I just remember when I heard Forward, when one of my tunes first got played at Forward, I went around telling everyone it was my tune. It's so embarrassing looking back at it.
You've got to, haven't you?
This is my tune. This is my tune.
So,
which is not a done thing, by the way, at Forward at all. Anyway,
I don't know. I don't think there's any wrong in it.
No, probably not.
It changed very quickly. And then I started to travel as well very shortly after that.
What was your first important international show, would you say?
It was Tresor.
Yeah, okay, right, yeah. So that's the other sort of important thing in your career that we haven't talked about at all, right?
Very, very important. So Tony Surgeon had a residency there once a month.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever played out of the country.
What was Tresor like? What was the original iteration of Tresor like?
It was rustic.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I mean, you'd have...
It was like super low ceiling and stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, with concrete falling off the ceiling onto your records. It was rustic. I mean, thank God there was never a fire in there, because you would definitely weren't getting out. You know, it was crazy, but particularly during Love Parade, where you couldn't even breathe down there. It was like a little dungeon. Yeah, Berlin was a very different place back then.
Okay, how was it different?
It's kind of cleaned up a bit, isn't it? Is that the right way of putting it? It's a lot more. It's not kind of so.
Oh, there's a lot less squats for a start, which is obviously makes a difference. But I think that it's cleaned up in the sort of mentality as well of people. Maybe, is that fair?
Quite possibly. I mean, I've never lived there, but
Right. Yeah.
It's probably the place that I've been most on my travels. I mean, it's still go now.
So, Hans, what year was it then that you first played Tresor?
96, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so that's I mean, the wall had only been down for a short period of time, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
At that point, I mean, I didn't go there until 10 years after that, and you could tell. Well, I mean, obviously you saw the photos of what it was like when the wall came down, and so you could tell that stuff had changed. But then a lot of buildings were just still squats.
Absolutely.
In 2006, 2007, it must have been that much more, I suppose. Must have
Absolutely.
been pretty, like you say, an eye-opening.
It was, and I mean, I'm actually there on Saturday, so I'm still playing there now, and I've loved my relationship with them as a club and as a label. I think they were highly instrumental when they began with bringing over the Detroit artists and what have you. And,
absolutely, yeah.
They're part of the history of techno in Europe shouldn't be underestimated, I don't think.
Yeah. Have you read that book, The Clang de Familia? That one.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing book. I've talked about it quite a few times on the show. I would recommend anyone.
There's some great stories in there.
Amazing stories. Yeah, that guy Johnny, who then ran that club Horst. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
Yeah, he's an interesting bloke in many ways. And no, he was. Yeah, they're like you say, they were the first people in Europe to bring over the Detroit guys, right? And it was early.
They were, yes.
Yeah.
As I know, they were the first.
Definitely were. Yeah, and it was like I said, it was like '89 or something, wasn't it? Like first
something like that. I know they brought Underground Resistance over to tour, I think, and then obviously they signed X102, etc. to them. And it was a very interesting time for music then. There was a definite shift, and I think that's all could also be to do with the European influence on what was going on with the scene over
yeah,
there.
it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, Detroit is obviously the home of techno. When I had Chris Leaving on, he was pretty bullish about the role of Frankfurt in the development of techno. And I think I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of like, actually, techno is Frankfurt, which is obviously a slightly controversial
Not
take. But
sure I agree with that.
yeah, exactly.
In fact, I would wholeheartedly disagree. Wasn't
Absolutely.
Frankfurt was more trance, wasn't it? As I remember.
Yeah.
Probably upset a few
Maybe.
people there. Wasn't it?
I mean, it was key, absolutely key.
Yeah.
I mean, the Cocoon Club and the rest of it, but there's loads of other ones. But you're right to say that the influence of Europe was. I mean, it went both ways, right? The influence of European music absolutely had a bearing on what was going on in the States too. It must have done.
I'll never forget the first time I played in Detroit, actually, and I thought, going to show my respect for the...
Right, okay.
And I just remember thinking these people didn't know anything, the music, and it wasn't what they were buzzing off at all. It was the more European...
Oh, they wanted to hear the European stuff, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Which I suppose I get, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. But I think particularly, like, if people knew who you were as well, you know, when you come out and see, like, if you went to see a Detroit DJ, you wanted to play Detroit music, right? And I suppose it works the other way. You know?
Yeah.
If someone's coming out to see
I guess so, yeah.
European DJ, that's the sound you want to hear. But yeah. So to talk a bit more about playing internationally more. So Tresor, like, key. What are the other? We'll talk about Germany and Detroit. What are the other important places in the development of techno? Yes. So where in Spain? Everywhere.
Length and breadth of Spain. Yeah. I mean, particularly the UK guys, we were there constantly.
Really?
I mean, there'd be months where you went every weekend. Yeah. Sometimes you do 3, 4, you do 2 a night, drive between 4 hours between different venues. It was prolific, the amount of gigs that happened there. And then it dropped off. For quite a long period of time, actually, but it seems to be on the rise there again. There's definitely more going on than there has been a few years ago. But I think it was instrumental in a lot of the UK artists' careers. Spain, we were there a lot. Yeah,
okay. And different kind of sounds that they wanted, or was it?
Yes.
There was a Spanish techno sound, isn't there? No, there has been.
There is, and they could get quite upset if you. I mean, there's several occasions of things being thrown.
Okay.
I can remember glasses being thrown and or waving their shoes. That apparently that's quite a big insult or something.
Okay. I was going to say that's like a good thing, no?
No, I don't think it is anyway. But it did create a certain sound. But the gigs over there were crazy. It was good fun. Well, they still are good fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Italy. So I had Riva Starr on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I was trying to get him to explain the Italian club scene and how massive it was and how annoyingly it declined. That's sort of similar to Spain, actually, because there used to be so many more regional clubs in Spain which don't exist so much anymore. And the same is true for Italy. There was seemingly when I first started going there 15 years ago, so there seemed to be a really good club in basically every village in Italy, right? I mean, what about Italy?
I don't think it was ever the biggest region for me, Italy. I've played there a lot, but it was never on the level of Spain or Holland or Germany. Yeah. So, I'm probably not the best person to ask about the Italian scene, although I have played there a lot. But you're right. There has been a lot of clubs over the years, and they've tended to be pretty wild.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let me ask you a couple of specific ones just to finish. This has been great, by the way. Okay. Just to put you on the spot and take as long as you want to think about these. Top 3 gigs and top 3 techno tunes.
Come on. My God. Top 3 gigs?
Or don't only top 3.
Oh, that's...
or just pick out a couple that spring to mind.
One that immediately comes to mind was the Liquid Room in Tokyo, the first time I went there.
Wow.
I think that was wrapped around the club. I loved it, and the whole experience. So that immediately comes to mind. Eventually playing Lost after being a disciple for so long.
That's got to be a good thing.
Oh,
too.
look, there's been so many. Spain, playing the Larry Howe was amazing. The Orbit in Leeds, I loved. There's so many. I've had some great nights in Berghain doing the first time I sort of played more elongated sets, which get harder as you get older.
They do. Alas.
I've been very lucky to travel extensively, and every single gig has had something. So it's hard to sort of pinpoint.
Okay. And I said top 3 techno tunes, but let's make it a bit easier.
So hard.
Let's make it a bit easier. Doesn't have to be top 3, but from the label catalogue, pick out a few tunes from the label catalogue that people should go and check out now. If they maybe some deep cuts.
That's really hard as
Without
well.
putting you on the spot.
that is really hard. I think Oliver Howe's Duality, a double pack that came out early on, that needs to be listened to. I would run to that. The 65D Mavericks double pack is an interesting record. I'm thinking of more the older stuff. I don't want to upset anyone by doing the new stuff. I love all of them, otherwise they wouldn't come out.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, there's one record that I did that is probably the only one that I'm like, I don't know that I should have put that out. No, I'm not telling you all.
Yeah, I've got a couple of them as well. They shall remain nameless. Absolutely. Cool. Okay, well, listen, James. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Really
It's
appreciate
been
it.
fun.
Absolutely has. Yeah, and hopefully actually, you know what? Before I let you go, tell me more about James Ruskin, the car racer. Go on, tell me about this.
Well, it's something I've dabbled with since I was a teenager in various guises. I started stock car racing when I was a teenager.
Right. Okay.
I love things with a motor. Before I was in the music industry, I was a panel beater and painter.
Oh, were you? Right.
And then I
okay.
ended up being a mechanic. So
Right.
I was in that world quite a lot.
Okay.
And then over the years, I've done various different things. But this season, I got offered the opportunity to race an old Formula 2 car, which I managed to absolutely destroy yesterday. I'm having to smile because it's horrendous. I mean, literally totaled it.
Didn't belong to you though, luckily. Or is that good or bad? It's pretty bad.
That's bad. If it was mine, I wouldn't feel. I'd be feeling very
shouldn't be
different to what I
laughing
do
about
now.
this.
It's absolutely horrendous. So it's something I've messed around with over the years.
What's the most notable car that you've raced?
Well, it would have been that.
Okay.
It would have been that, but it come off considerably worse than myself. And I shouldn't. I'm laughing because I was actually very, very lucky yesterday.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it sounds that way.
Yeah, and it didn't kind of sink in. I actually spoke to the guy who owned the car this morning on the way here, and he's gone out. He said, "Yeah, it didn't sink in yesterday. You were really, really lucky." Oh my god! So yeah, that would have been
Okay.
But I've got to smile because I'm all right.
Well, I'm glad we've got this scoop on the show that James Ruskin, the car racer. Anyway, thanks, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.